Hello there, and welcome back to Chronicle Keepers. If you're new here, you've found a quiet corner of the internet where history meets the peaceful hours of the night. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Dim those lights, adjust your pillows. Maybe turn on a fan, or find that perfect sleeping position. There's no rush, just stories and soft voices until you drift off. Now, here's a question. When was the last time you paid for something with actual cash? Paper money, metal coins, handed to another human being. For many of us, it's been a while. We tap, we swipe, we wave our phones like magic wands. Plastic rectangles and digital beeps have replaced the simple exchange of physical currency that humans used for thousands of years. Credit cards seem so utterly normal now, so obvious. But here's the thing, they're not even a century old. Your grandparents, maybe even your parents, remember a world where every transaction required real money in your pocket, where charging it wasn't an option, where the idea of buying something you couldn't yet afford was complicated. Credit cards didn't just change how we pay, they changed how we think about money itself. If you enjoy these late-night journeys through history, I'd love a like or subscribe, but only if it genuinely feels right. And I'm curious, do you remember your first credit card? Or better yet, do you remember life before plastic? Drop a comment below. Congratulations, you're about to discover that the piece of plastic in your wallet has a more chaotic origin story than most superheroes. Let's dive in. Before we explore how credit cards conquered the world, we need to understand what they replaced, because the world before plastic was different, inconvenient in ways that seem almost quaint now, but also simpler in ways we might occasionally miss. Let's step back in time and remember what buying things actually looked like. Picture yourself in America, sometime in the early 20th century, the 1920s perhaps, or the 1940s. The specific decade doesn't matter much. The experience was remarkably similar for generations. You want to buy something, anything, a new coat, a washing machine, dinner at a restaurant, groceries for the week. You need cash. That's it. That's the entire system. If you have cash in your pocket, you can make the purchase. If you don't, you can't. There's no swiping, no tapping, no, I'll just put it on my card. Cash or nothing. Now, this worked fine for small everyday purchases. You'd keep some bills in your wallet, some coins in your pocket. Bread, milk, a newspaper, no problem. But what about bigger purchases? Imagine you're buying a new refrigerator, a major investment, the equivalent of several $100s in today's money. You need to walk into that appliance store carrying a substantial amount of cash, bills folded in your wallet, maybe an envelope thick with paper money. Feel the weight of it. Feel the nervousness. What if you're robbed on the way? What if you lose your wallet? What if someone sees you counting out all that money and follows you home? Every major purchase carried this anxiety. The money was physical, tangible, and once it left your hands, it was gone. No fraud protection, no way to cancel the transaction, no recourse if something went wrong. And here's another problem that seems almost unbelievable today. Banks closed at 3 p.m. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That was it. Doors locked, tellers gone home, vaults sealed until morning, and they weren't open on weekends at all. Think about what this meant for ordinary life. If you realized on Friday evening that you needed cash for Saturday, you were out of luck. If you ran out of money during a Sunday shopping trip, well, you simply stopped shopping. There was no ATM on the corner, no way to access your own money outside of bankers' hours. You had to plan. You had to anticipate. You had to make sure every single week that you had enough physical cash to cover whatever might come up before the bank opened again. It sounds exhausting because it was exhausting. An entire layer of mental overhead that we've completely forgotten existed. Now, this isn't to say that nobody ever bought anything without cash in hand. Credit existed. It just worked differently. In small communities, credit was personal. The butcher knew you. He'd known your family for years. Your father bought meat here. Your grandfather too, probably. When you asked to put it on my tab, the butcher nodded and wrote your name in his ledger book. No credit score, no application, no terms and conditions. Just trust between neighbors. The grocer operated the same way. The baker, the general store. In a town where everyone knew everyone, your reputation was your credit. Pay your debts, and merchants extended more credit. Fail to pay, and word got around. Quickly. Put it on my tab wasn't just a phrase, it was an entire economic system built on social trust. But this system had limits, serious limits. What happened if you moved to a new town? Suddenly, nobody knew you. Nobody trusted you. You had no history, no reputation, no relationships with local merchants. You were starting from zero. And credit wasn't available to everyone equally. Respectable families, which usually meant white, middle class, or wealthy, established in the community, received credit easily. Others faced suspicion, higher scrutiny, or outright refusal. Your access to credit depended on who you were, who your family was, what you looked like, where you lived. The system was deeply personal, which meant it was also deeply unfair. Credit existed, but it was local, limited, and loaded with social judgment. Now, as America industrialized and cities grew larger, something interesting emerged. Department stores, grand palaces of retail, Macy's in New York, Marshall Field's in Chicago, Wanamaker's in Philadelphia. These weren't small shops where the owner knew your grandmother. These were vast commercial enterprises with thousands of customers. How do you extend credit when you don't personally know the buyer? The answer, starting in the 1920s, was the charge plate. Picture a small metal plate, roughly the size of a dog tag. Your name embossed on the surface, an account number pressed into the metal. You'd receive this plate when you opened an account at a department store. When you made a purchase, the clerk would take your plate and place it into a device called an imprinter. They'd lay a paper receipt over it, slide a lever, and ka-chunk. That satisfying, mechanical sound as the raised letters pressed through carbon paper, creating a record of your purchase, your name, your account number, the amount, all captured in that single motion. You'd sign the receipt. The store would bill you at the end of the month. Simple, elegant, and for its time, quite sophisticated. There was just one problem. Your Macy's charge plate only worked at Macy's. If you also shopped at Gimbel's, you needed a Gimbel's plate, and a Bloomingdale's plate, and a Saks plate. Oil companies like Texaco and Shell issued their own plates for gasoline purchases. Hotel chains had their own systems. Western Union had cards for their services. Imagine your wallet, not slim and simple, more like a filing cabinet. Metal plates clanking together. A different piece of embossed aluminum for every merchant you frequented. The wealthier you were, the more plates you carried. Some people had dozens, and each one came with its own monthly bill. Separate statements from every store, separate checks to write, separate envelopes to mail. Wealthy families sometimes employed secretaries partly just to manage all this paperwork, to track what was owed where, to write the checks, to reconcile the accounts. Regular people? They mostly just used cash for everything. The charge plate system was sophisticated, but it was also cumbersome enough that many folks decided it wasn't worth the hassle. Let's pause and really appreciate how inconvenient all of this was. Every store had its own system. Every system had its own application process, its own plate, its own billing cycle. There was no standardization, no interoperability, no single solution that worked everywhere. You couldn't walk into a store where you didn't have an account and expect credit. You couldn't use your Macy's account at a restaurant. You couldn't use your Shell Oil card to buy groceries. The systems were islands, isolated from each other. And the technology, while clever, was entirely manual. Carbon paper receipts, handwritten ledgers, monthly statements typed individually. Every transaction required paperwork, filing, human processing. Mistakes happened. Bills got lost. Disputes were difficult to resolve. The overhead costs of running these systems were substantial. What people really wanted, though perhaps they couldn't articulate it yet, was something simpler. One card, accepted everywhere, with one bill at the end of the month. The idea seems obvious in retrospect, but nobody had figured out how to make it work. Not yet. And now we arrive at 1950, and a story that may or may not be entirely true, but has become legend nonetheless. Frank McNamara was a businessman in New York. One evening, he took clients out for dinner at Major's Cabin Grill, a restaurant in Manhattan. The meal was pleasant, the conversation was good, the business was conducted successfully. Then the check arrived, and Frank McNamara realized he had forgotten his wallet. The embarrassment must have been excruciating. A businessman entertaining clients, unable to pay for dinner. He had to call his wife to bring money to rescue him from the situation. As he sat there waiting, humiliated, an idea began to form. What if there was a card, a single card, that was accepted at multiple restaurants? A card that lets you eat now and pay later without carrying cash, without the embarrassment of an empty wallet? Whether this exact story happened or not, what came next certainly did. In February 1950, Frank McNamara and his partner Ralph Schneider launched Diners Club. They convinced 14 restaurants in New York to accept their card. They signed up 200 card holders, mostly businessmen who frequently entertained clients. The card itself was humble. Cardboard, actually, not plastic. Just a paper card with the member's name and account number. The system worked like this. You presented your Diners Club card at a participating restaurant. They recorded your information. You signed for the meal. At the end of the month, Diners Club sent you a single bill for all your restaurant charges. One statement, one check to write. The restaurants paid Diners Club a small percentage of each transaction, a fee for the convenience of guaranteed payment and increased customer traffic. This wasn't technically a credit card in the modern sense. You had to pay your balance in full each month. There was no option to carry a balance, no revolving credit, no interest charges. It was a charge card, a convenience for payment, not a loan. But it was revolutionary nonetheless. One card, multiple merchants, one bill. The annual fee was $3, about $38 in today's money. Not cheap, but reasonable for the convenience offered. And there was something else, something intangible but powerful. Carrying a Diners Club card meant something. It marked you as a certain kind of person, a businessman, a traveler, someone sophisticated enough to need such a thing, someone important enough to be extended this kind of trust. The card became a status symbol as much as a payment tool. By the end of 1950, Diners Club had 20,000 cardholders. By 1951, they were expanding beyond restaurants to hotels, car rentals, and retail stores. The concept had proven itself. Diners Club had opened a door, and others noticed. American Express had been in business since 1850, originally as an express mail company, later famous for travelers' checks. They watched the charge card market develop with growing interest. In 1958, they launched their own card. The American Express card was purple, later green, and it came with something Diners Club couldn't quite match: prestige. American Express had spent a century building a reputation for reliability and sophistication. Their travelers' checks were trusted worldwide. Their name meant security, respectability, quality. They positioned their card accordingly. This wasn't just for restaurant meals. This was for travelers, for worldly people, for those who demanded the best. The annual fees were higher than Diners Club. The acceptance requirements were stricter. The message was clear. Not everyone qualified for this card. Having one meant you had arrived. "Don't leave home without it" would become their famous slogan. But that came later. In 1958, the appeal was simpler. This card says something about who you are. Like Diners Club, American Express was a charge card, not a credit card. You paid in full each month. There was no option to carry a balance. But the market was growing. The concept was proving itself. People wanted the convenience of cards. Banks were watching, calculating, seeing an opportunity that went beyond what Diners Club or American Express had imagined. So here we are at the end of the 1950s. People have proven they want alternatives to cash. Charge plates work, but they're limited to single merchants. Diners Club and American Express work, but they require payment in full each month. But what if people want to buy something they can't afford to pay for right away? What if they want to spread the cost over time? What if they want actual credit? This was the gap in the market. Merchants wanted to increase sales, and sales increase when customers can buy now and pay later. Consumers wanted flexibility, the ability to make purchases beyond their immediate cash on hand. Banks wanted to earn interest, and what better way than lending money to consumers for everyday purchases? The pieces were all there. The desire was there. The technology, primitive but functional, was there. Someone just needed to put it all together. Someone needed to create a card that worked at multiple merchants, that allowed balances to be carried from month to month, that let ordinary people, not just businessmen, buy on credit. Someone needed to invent the modern credit card. And as it happened, a bank in California was about to do exactly that, in a manner so chaotic, so poorly planned, and so ultimately successful that it would reshape the entire world's relationship with money. Imagine needing a different metal plate for every store. Your wallet was basically a filing cabinet, but that filing cabinet was about to be replaced by a single piece of plastic. And the story of how that happened is far stranger than you might expect. So we've met the pioneers, Frank McNamara and his forgotten wallet, the Diners Club cardboard card, the traveling businessmen settling tabs at fancy restaurants. But Diners Club, for all its innovation, was still a niche product, a club for the expense account crowd, not something ordinary people used for ordinary purchases. What happened next would change everything. And I do mean everything. Because in 1958, one of America's largest banks decided to do something that, in retrospect, seems absolutely insane. They decided to mail credit cards, unsolicited, unrequested, to tens of thousands of people who had never applied for them. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. September 1958. Fresno, California. Bank of America, the largest bank in California and one of the largest in the nation, launches an experiment. They call their new product BankAmericard, a general-purpose credit card that could be used at any participating merchant. But here's the thing about credit cards. They have a chicken and egg problem. Consumers won't sign up for a card that merchants don't accept. Merchants won't bother accepting a card that consumers don't carry. How do you solve this? Bank of America's solution was bold. Some might say reckless. Others might say completely unhinged. They printed 60,000 credit cards, and they mailed them to Fresno residents, unsolicited, unrequested. People who had never applied for credit, never asked for a card, woke up one morning to find a BankAmericard in their mailbox. No credit check, no application, no income verification. If you had a mailing address in Fresno, you might get a credit card. Some recipients didn't even have bank accounts. Some had terrible credit. Some were minors. Some were deceased. Didn't matter. Cards went out anyway. This became known as the Fresno Drop, and it was, to put it mildly, chaos. Now, Bank of America wasn't completely crazy. They had reasons for choosing Fresno. First, it was a medium-sized city, about 250,000 people. Big enough to be a real test, small enough to be manageable. Second, Fresno was geographically isolated. The nearest major city was hours away. If the experiment failed spectacularly, the damage would be contained. The chaos wouldn't spread to Los Angeles or San Francisco. Third, Bank of America already had strong relationships with Fresno merchants. They could personally convince local businesses to accept the card. The strategy was to overwhelm the chicken and egg problem through sheer force. Flood the market with card holders. Simultaneously sign up enough merchants. Create a critical mass where both sides found the card useful. And to Bank of America's credit, the basic concept worked. Within a year, over 2 million cards were in circulation across California. Merchants were signing up, people were charging purchases, but there were complications. Let's talk about what went wrong. And I hope you're sitting down. Fraud exploded. Remember, these cards had no security features. No magnetic stripe. That hadn't been invented yet. No hologram. No chip. Just a piece of plastic with embossed numbers and a signature panel. Counterfeiting was trivially easy. Stealing cards from mailboxes was even easier. People received cards, maxed them out, and had no intention of ever paying. Why would they? Many recipients hadn't asked for this credit. Some didn't even understand what a credit card was. Merchants had no way to verify if a card was valid. Was this card stolen? Was it maxed out? Had it been cancelled? The merchant had no idea. They just ran the card through an imprinter, created a carbon copy receipt, and hoped for the best. Bank of America lost money. A lot of money. In the first year, delinquency rates hit 22%. Fraud losses were astronomical. Some estimates suggest the program lost $20 million in those early years, equivalent to over $200 million today. Competitors watched this disaster unfold and concluded that Bank of America had lost their minds. Credit cards for the masses? Clearly impossible. Clearly a terrible idea. Except Bank of America didn't give up. They refined the system. They improved fraud detection. They got better at screening who actually got cards. And slowly, painfully, BankAmericard started working. Other banks noticed, and they thought, maybe this isn't so crazy after all. By the mid-1960s, banks across America were launching their own cards, and they used the same strategy. Mass mailings, unsolicited cards, the Fresno drop, replicated in city after city. In 1966 alone, over 100 million credit cards were mailed to American consumers. Most of these people had never requested them. They just appeared. Every major bank wanted in on the action. Different regions had different cards, different networks, different systems. None of them talked to each other. If you traveled from New York to Los Angeles, your credit card might not work. Different banks, different arrangements, different merchant networks. It was chaos, but profitable chaos, potentially. Banks saw the future, a future where every transaction generated fees, where interest payments created steady revenue, where Americans would buy things they couldn't afford and pay for them slowly, with interest. That future required getting cards into as many hands as possible. And if some of those hands belonged to fraudsters, deadbeats, or people who shouldn't have credit, well, that was the cost of doing business. Until Chicago. 1966. Chicago, Illinois. Multiple banks decide to launch credit cards in Chicago simultaneously. This is going to be the big one. The validation of the credit card concept. Chicago. The banks mail out approximately 5 million credit cards to Chicago area residents. 5 million. What followed was the closest thing to financial apocalypse the credit card industry had ever seen. Cards were stolen from mailboxes by the thousands. Criminals figured out that apartment building mailboxes were essentially treasure chests. One thief could grab dozens of cards in a single trip. Organized crime got involved. Networks of fraudsters used stolen cards for massive shopping sprees. They'd buy merchandise, return it for cash, disappear. People who received cards they hadn't requested maxed them out and vanished. Why not? They'd never agreed to anything. Cards were found in dumpsters, in gutters, scattered across the city. The mail system couldn't handle the volume. Cards went to wrong addresses, to empty apartments, to people who had moved years ago. One Chicago bank, Continental Illinois, lost $6 million in a single year. That's roughly $56 million in today's money, from one bank in one city. The industry nearly collapsed. Banks seriously considered abandoning credit cards entirely. Congressional hearings were held. Newspapers ran outraged stories about this reckless experiment in consumer credit. For a moment, it looked like the credit card might be a failed experiment, a good idea that simply couldn't work in practice. But the banks had seen the potential. They knew that if they could solve the fraud problem, if they could build proper systems, the credit card would be a money-printing machine. They just had to survive long enough to figure it out. Let's talk about what these early credit cards actually looked like. Because by modern standards, they were laughably primitive. No magnetic stripe. That technology wouldn't arrive until the 1970s. No hologram, no security chip, no CVV code on the back, just a plastic card with embossed numbers that you could feel with your fingertips. A signature panel. Maybe a simple design or logo. The embossed numbers existed for a reason. Imprinters. Those manual machines that merchants used to create transaction records. You'd hand your card to a cashier. They'd place it in the imprinter with a multi-part carbon form. They'd slide a handle across, pressing the carbon against the embossed numbers. This created a physical impression of your card number on multiple copies. The merchant kept one copy, you kept one copy. The bank eventually received one copy, often days later, after being physically mailed. Everything was manual. Everything was slow. Everything was vulnerable to error and fraud. Want to use a stolen card? Just sign a name, any name. The signature would be checked against nothing. There was no database, no photo ID requirements, no electronic verification. Early credit cards were essentially an honor system backed by embossed plastic. How did merchants know if a card was valid? The honest answer? Often, they didn't. For small purchases, merchants just accepted the card and hoped for the best. The losses from occasional fraud were considered a cost of doing business. For larger purchases, merchants were supposed to call the bank. This meant physically picking up a telephone, dialing a number, waiting on hold. Yes, being put on hold was just as annoying in 1965, and eventually speaking to someone who would manually check if the card was valid and had available credit. This could take 10 minutes or longer, with customers waiting impatiently in line. So merchants often skipped verification entirely. Banks tried another approach, warning bulletins. They'd print booklets, sometimes hundreds of pages thick, listing the numbers of stolen, cancelled, or maxed out cards. Merchants were supposed to check every card against this booklet before accepting it. Can you imagine? Flipping through a phone book-sized list of numbers for every single transaction? Nobody did it. The booklets gathered dust under counters. Fraud continued. The industry desperately needed technology that didn't exist yet. Despite the chaos, banks discovered something important. Credit cards could be incredibly profitable. Interest rates on unpaid balances ran 18 to 24% annually. Those same rates, remarkably, persist today. Annual fees brought in steady revenue. Late payment penalties added more. Merchant fees, a percentage of every transaction, accumulated. The math was brutal but simple. If you could control fraud losses below a certain threshold, the interest and fees more than compensated. Early credit cards weren't profitable, but the model was clearly profitable if only the execution problems could be solved. And that realization kept banks in the game, even as they hemorrhaged money. So here we are, at the end of credit cards' Wild West era. By 1970, the industry was at a crossroads. Mass mailings had created millions of cardholders and millions of dollars in fraud losses. Primitive technology meant merchants couldn't verify transactions. Organized crime had discovered a lucrative new target. Congressional anger was building. The credit card could have died here, could have been remembered as a fascinating experiment that didn't quite work, like personal helicopters or picture phones. But it didn't die, because the potential was too great. The vision of a cashless transaction happening anywhere, financed by the bank and repaid with interest, that vision was too powerful to abandon. What the industry needed was organization, standards, technology, a way to make thousands of banks work together instead of against each other. In our next segment, we'll see how the chaos of the 1960s gave birth to the networks we know today, how BankAmericard became Visa, how a rival alliance became MasterCard, and how the modern credit card infrastructure finally emerged from the wreckage. The Wild West was about to get civilized. Sort of. The 1960s had been wild. Credit cards had burst onto the scene with all the chaos of an untamed frontier. Mass mailings, rampant fraud, confused consumers, overwhelmed banks. The industry was like a gold rush town, full of energy and ambition, but desperately in need of law and order. The 1970s would bring that order, slowly, imperfectly, but unmistakably. Let's watch as the chaos transforms into a system. By the mid-1960s, banks across America were issuing their own credit cards, each with its own name, each with its own network of merchants, each incompatible with the others. If you had a credit card from First National Bank of Chicago, it worked only at merchants who had agreements with First National Bank of Chicago. Travel to another city, and your card might be useless. This was obviously inefficient. Merchants didn't want to sign up with dozens of different banks. Consumers didn't want to carry a wallet full of different cards. The whole point of a universal payment system was universality. The banks, despite being competitors, realized they needed to cooperate. In 1966, a group of California banks formed something called the Interbank Card Association. The concept was elegant. Multiple banks could issue cards that all worked on the same network. A merchant who accepted one interbank card accepted them all. You could have a card from your local bank in Ohio, and it would work at a store in Florida that had never heard of your bank. The network connected everyone. Other regional associations merged in. The system grew. The association would eventually rebrand in 1979, adopting a new name that you definitely know: MasterCard. Those interlocking circles, red and yellow, later red and orange, became one of the most recognized symbols in the world. But it started as a practical solution to a coordination problem. Banks agreeing to play by the same rules. Meanwhile, Bank of America had its own ideas. Their BankAmericard had recovered from the Fresno disaster and become genuinely successful in California. Other banks wanted in. They wanted to issue their own versions of this clearly winning concept. Bank of America began licensing the BankAmericard name and system to banks across the country. You could be a small bank in Minnesota and issue BankAmericards to your customers using Bank of America's infrastructure and network. By the early 1970s, BankAmericard was truly national. Cards issued by different banks, all working together, all accepted at the same merchants. But there was a problem with the name. BankAmericard sounded like it belonged to Bank of America, which it did originally. Other banks bristled at promoting a competitor's brand, and internationally, the name was awkward. America, in the title, didn't play well everywhere. In 1976, the network rebranded. They chose a new name carefully. It needed to work in any language. It needed to be short, memorable, and universal. It needed to convey acceptance, welcome, passage, visa. The name worked in English, Spanish, French, Japanese, virtually any language. It evoked travel, sophistication, access. The blue and gold colors were designed to feel trustworthy and premium. And just like that, the two giants of the credit card world had their names: Visa and MasterCard, two networks that would dominate global payments for decades to come. The duopoly was born. All of this network cooperation was helpful, but there was still a fundamental problem. Credit card transactions were slow, manual, paper-based. When you made a purchase, the clerk took your card, placed it in that mechanical imprinter, and ka-chunk, created a carbon copy receipt. Then they might call the bank to verify your credit. Then you signed. Then the paperwork went into a pile to be processed later. Every step was an opportunity for error, for fraud, for delay. What the industry needed was a way to store information on the card itself, something a machine could read automatically. Enter Forrest Parry. Parry was an IBM engineer working on a different problem: ID cards for the CIA. He had the idea of putting a magnetic stripe on the card, similar to magnetic tape used in computers. The stripe could store data that machines could read, but he couldn't get the magnetic material to stick to the plastic card properly. The adhesives didn't work. The stripe peeled off or degraded. One evening, frustrated, he brought the problem home. His wife was ironing clothes. She suggested almost casually, "Why not try ironing the stripe onto the card?" He did. The heat from the iron bonded the magnetic stripe to the plastic. It worked. This is how major technological breakthroughs sometimes happen. Not in laboratories with expensive equipment, but in living rooms with household appliances and patient spouses. The magnetic stripe changed everything. Now, the card itself could carry information: account numbers, expiration dates, verification codes. A machine could read this information in a fraction of a second. The old imprinters didn't disappear overnight. Many merchants kept them for decades as backups. But electronic terminals began replacing them. Swipe the card, read the stripe, process the transaction. There was a cost, of course. Merchants needed to buy new terminals. New infrastructure had to be built. The transition took years, but the direction was clear. Credit cards were becoming electronic, digital, modern. With magnetic stripes and electronic terminals came something else: real-time authorization. In the old days, a merchant might call the bank to verify a large purchase, waiting on hold while someone manually checked your account. For small purchases, they often didn't bother. Too time-consuming. They just trusted the card was good. Fraudsters exploited this gap ruthlessly. Electronic authorization changed the equation. The merchant swipes your card. The terminal dials the bank's computer. Yes, over telephone lines, with that distinctive modem screech. Within 30 seconds to a minute, an answer comes back: approved or declined. That word appearing on the terminal screen. The clerk's awkward glance. The moment of confusion and embarrassment as you search for another form of payment. Real-time authorization dramatically reduced certain types of fraud. Stolen cards could be flagged almost immediately. Accounts over their limit would be rejected. The computer knew things the merchant couldn't know just by looking at a piece of plastic. The system wasn't perfect. Fraudsters adapted. New scams emerged. But authorization represented a fundamental shift, from trusting the card to verifying the card. Every transaction now left an electronic trail. Every purchase was checked against a database. The infrastructure of surveillance was being built, one swipe at a time. Speaking of surveillance, banks needed to know who to trust. In the old days, a local banker might know your family, know your reputation, make lending decisions based on personal knowledge. But credit cards were national now. You might apply for a card from a bank 1,000 miles away. How would they know if you paid your debts? The answer was credit bureaus. These companies collected information about your financial behavior. Did you pay your bills on time? Had you defaulted on loans? How much debt did you carry? Banks shared data with the bureaus. When you applied for credit, the bank checked with the bureau. A dossier on your financial life, available to anyone willing to pay for it. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. These three companies became the gatekeepers of credit in America. Their records determined who could borrow and who couldn't, who got the good interest rates and who got rejected. The credit score itself, that three-digit number that defines financial life for so many Americans, wouldn't be invented until 1989. But the groundwork was laid in the 1970s. The data collection, the record-keeping, the architecture of financial judgment. Privacy advocates raised concerns. Your financial life compiled and sold without your meaningful consent. Errors in the records, and there were many, could haunt you for years. But the industry pushed forward. The convenience for lenders outweighed the concerns of borrowers. Your credit history became a permanent file, a reputation you couldn't escape. Congress, meanwhile, was trying to bring order to the chaos. The Truth in Lending Act of 1970 required card issuers to clearly disclose interest rates and terms, no more hiding the true cost of credit in fine print. You had the right to know what you were paying. But the most revolutionary regulation came in 1974. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act made it illegal to deny credit based on sex, race, religion, national origin, or marital status. This sounds obvious now. It was not obvious then. Before 1974, women routinely could not get credit cards in their own names. A married woman needed her husband's signature. A single woman was considered a credit risk simply for being unmarried. A divorced woman might find her credit history erased. It had been under her husband's name. Women applying for cards were asked questions that men never faced. Are you planning to have children? What does your husband do for a living? Why do you need your own credit? The 1974 law didn't end discrimination overnight. Attitudes changed slowly. Enforcement was imperfect, but the legal foundation was laid. Credit would be judged on creditworthiness, not identity. The Fair Credit Billing Act, also 1974, created processes for disputing charges. If something appeared on your bill that you didn't authorize, you had rights, procedures to follow. The bank couldn't simply ignore your complaint. Layer by layer, regulation was civilizing the industry. And then there was the matter of those mass mailings. After the Chicago disaster, cards falling into wrong hands, fraud exploding, consumers drowning in debt they hadn't requested, Congress had had enough. In 1970, it became illegal to mail credit cards to people who hadn't applied for them. Simple, direct, effective. Banks couldn't just carpet bomb neighborhoods with live cards anymore. You had to request a card. You had to opt in. The mass mailing madness stopped. That particular form of chaos ended. Of course, banks found other ways to market aggressively. Pre-approved offers. Applications in every piece of mail. Telemarketers calling during dinner. The solicitation didn't stop. It just took different forms. But at least you weren't receiving functional credit cards you'd never asked for. At least the fraud vector of intercepted mail was reduced. Small victories. While Visa and MasterCard were building their empires, the department stores watched nervously. Sears, JCPenney, Montgomery Ward. These retailers had their own credit systems, their own charge cards, their own loyal customers who paid interest directly to them. Why would they accept Visa and MasterCard? Every transaction on a bank card meant paying fees, 2, 3, 4% to the card networks. That cut directly into profits. Plus, their own store cards kept customers loyal. If you had a Sears card, you shopped at Sears. The department stores resisted. They refused to accept bank cards. Their own systems were working fine, thank you very much. But customers wanted convenience. They didn't want to carry a different card for every store. They wanted to pay with the Visa that worked everywhere else. Slowly, reluctantly, the stores caved. One by one, they began accepting bank cards alongside their own. The fees hurt, but losing customers hurt more. Store cards didn't disappear. They still exist today, often offering special discounts to encourage loyalty. But they became secondary. The bank cards won. Credit cards were crossing borders now. What had started as an American phenomenon was spreading globally. Visa and MasterCard established networks in Europe, Asia, Latin America. The same piece of plastic that worked in Chicago now worked in London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. But adoption varied dramatically by culture. Japan embraced credit cards enthusiastically. The technology-loving culture saw them as modern and convenient. Card usage grew rapidly. Germany was more suspicious. The German language has the same word for debt and guilt, Schuld. Cultural attitudes toward borrowing were cautious. Cash remained king far longer than in America. Scandinavian countries adopted cards quickly. Southern European countries moved more slowly. Each society brought its own relationship with debt, its own trust in institutions, its own comfort with technology. By 1980, credit cards were becoming normal throughout the wealthy world. Not universal yet, not dominant, but present, accepted, part of the landscape. The wild frontier was being settled. The chaos was becoming order. The revolution was becoming routine. A decade earlier, credit cards had been a mess. Unsolicited mail, rampant fraud, incompatible networks, discriminatory practices. Now there were systems, networks that cooperated, regulations that protected consumers, technology that verified transactions, standards that allowed a card from one bank to work with a merchant serviced by another. The infrastructure was in place. The rules were established. The major players had staked their positions. Now, the question became, who would use these cards? Would they remain tools for business people and the wealthy, or would they become something more? Something everyone carried, everyone used, everyone depended on? The answer would unfold in the decades ahead, as credit cards transformed from a convenience into a necessity, from an option into an assumption. The chaos of the 1960s, the infrastructure building of the 1970s. Visa and MasterCard emerging from the wreckage, electronic networks replacing phone calls and paper booklets. By 1980, credit cards worked. They actually reliably worked. Now came the next phase, making everyone use them. The 1980s would transform credit cards from a convenience for travelers and business people into an essential tool of everyday American life. From something you used for emergencies into something you used for everything. This decade would also transform how Americans thought about debt, turning borrowing from something slightly shameful into something aspirational, modern, even sophisticated. Welcome to the era of gold cards, rewards points, and membership has its privileges. Welcome to the decade that made plastic normal. Banks in the 1980s discovered something beautiful about credit cards. They were incredibly profitable. Every swipe generated merchant fees. Every unpaid balance generated interest, 18, 20, 24% annually. Every late payment triggered penalty fees. The economics were almost embarrassingly good. The challenge? Getting more cards into more hands, getting people to use them more often. The solution? Marketing. Unprecedented, relentless, sophisticated marketing. Television commercials flooded the airwaves. And these weren't dry financial advertisements, they were lifestyle commercials, aspirational dreams set to music, a well-dressed couple dining at an elegant restaurant, a businessman confidently checking into a luxury hotel, a woman shopping on Fifth Avenue, bags dangling from her arms, and always, the graceful presentation of the card, the subtle flash of gold or platinum. American Express perfected this art. Their tagline, "Membership has its privileges," implied that carrying their card wasn't just convenient. It was exclusive. It marked you as someone who had arrived. Visa countered with ubiquity. It's everywhere you want to be. The message, don't be caught without it. Don't be embarrassed when your card isn't accepted. MasterCard emphasized access. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Credit as the universal key, unlocking purchases both practical and priceless. The cumulative effect? Credit cards stopped being financial tools. They became identity markers, status symbols, tickets to the good life. And the marketing worked spectacularly. Somewhere in the early 1980s, bank marketing executives made a discovery that would shape and damage an entire generation. College students. Think about it from the bank's perspective. College students were future high earners. Get them hooked on your card at 19 and they might stay customers for life. Brand loyalty formed young. Plus, college students had something valuable. Parents. If a student couldn't pay their bill, mum and dad often would. So banks invaded college campuses. Walk across any university quad in the mid-1980s and you'd find them. Folding tables with cheerful representatives, clipboards with applications, and most importantly, free stuff. Sign up for a credit card, get a free t-shirt, a frisbee, a pizza coupon, a tote bag with the school logo, no income required, no credit history needed, no parental permission necessary. Students who had never held a job, who had no assets, who survived on ramen noodles and dining hall food. These students walked away with $500, $1,000, sometimes $2,000 credit limits. Many parents had no idea their children had credit cards until the bills came, or worse, until the collections calls started. By the late 1980s, credit card debt among young adults had skyrocketed. Students graduated not just with diplomas, but with thousands in high-interest debt. The banks considered this a success. The practice would continue, largely unregulated, for another 20 years. Financial literacy education? That wasn't the bank's problem. If regular credit cards conveyed status, banks reasoned, imagine what special cards could do. The gold card arrived. Suddenly, that standard green American Express wasn't enough. Gold cards promised higher credit limits, supposedly better interest rates, enhanced benefits, and most importantly, differentiation. When you pulled out a gold card, everyone noticed. You weren't just someone with credit, you were someone with good credit, someone who'd been approved for more. The psychology was brilliant. Banks had created artificial scarcity for a product they wanted everyone to have. They'd turned a financial tool into a status symbol and charged premium annual fees for the privilege. Then came platinum. If gold was impressive, platinum was exclusive. $100 annual fees, $200, higher credit limits, airport lounge access, concierge services that would book restaurants and find theater tickets. The message, there's wealthy and then there's platinum wealthy. Which one are you? American Express took this to its logical extreme in 1984 with the Platinum Card. By invitation only, $250 annual fee. Shocking at the time. The marketing was almost comically exclusive. If you have to ask about it, you probably don't qualify. This was credit as aspiration, credit as achievement, credit as proof that you'd made it. Other banks scrambled to create their own premium tiers. The arms race of card colors and benefits had begun, and people paid those annual fees gladly, because pulling out a platinum card at dinner said something about who you were, or at least who you wanted others to think you were. In 1986, Sears launched something new, the Discover card. Discover's innovation wasn't the card itself. It was what you got for using it. Cashback. Every purchase earned you money back. Actual cash. Use the card. Get paid. It seemed almost too good to be true. For the first time, credit card users had a positive incentive beyond convenience. Using credit wasn't just easier than cash. It was profitable. The math, of course, favored the banks. The cashback percentage was small, typically 1% or less. The interest charged on unpaid balances was 18% or more. But consumers focused on the rewards, not the interest. Other banks noticed Discover's success. They couldn't ignore it. Suddenly, partnerships bloomed. Credit cards linked to airline frequent flyer programs earn miles with every purchase, hotel loyalty programs, point systems that could be redeemed for merchandise. The credit card hack culture was born. Savvy consumers, or at least consumers who believed they were savvy, would optimize their cards. Which card for groceries? Which for gas? Which for travel? Banks loved this complexity. The more engaged consumers were with rewards programs, the more they used their cards. And most consumers weren't actually optimizing. They were just spending more. The rewards revolution had begun, and it would only accelerate. By the mid-1980s, something fundamental had shifted. We accept Visa and MasterCard. That sign appeared everywhere. Grocery stores, gas stations, convenience stores, fast food restaurants, the corner hardware store. Credit card acceptance went from competitive advantage to business necessity. Small merchants resisted. Those transaction fees, 2%, 3%, sometimes more, ate into already thin margins. But what choice did they have? Customers expected plastic. Customers without cash would walk away. The old mechanical imprinters, the ka-chunk machines creating carbon copies, began disappearing. Electronic terminals took their place. Sleek, efficient, connected. Transactions that once required phone calls and paper booklets now processed in seconds. Swipe, wait, approved. The beep of authorization became a familiar sound. For merchants, the calculation was simple. Accept cards and pay fees, or lose customers to competitors who did. For consumers, the calculation was even simpler. Why carry cash when plastic worked everywhere? The critical mass tipped. Credit cards stopped being unusual. They became expected. Think about what this meant for daily life. Before the 1980s, cash was normal. You went to the bank on Friday, cashed your paycheck, and that money funded your week. Running out of cash meant a trip back to the bank. By the late 1980s, this rhythm was breaking down. "I'll put it on my card" became a reflexive phrase, not for big purchases, for lunch, for groceries, for a tank of gas. Carrying large amounts of cash started to seem suspicious. What legitimate reason did someone have for a wallet full of bills? Were they hiding something? Evading taxes? Doing something shady? The cultural inversion was remarkable. Cash, the most fundamental form of money, the physical representation of value, was becoming slightly disreputable. Credit, Technically debt, technically borrowing, was becoming respectable. People stopped going to bank branches as often. What was the point? Their cards worked. ATMs dispensed cash when needed. Checkbooks gathered dust in drawers. Writing a check at the grocery store, once normal, started generating sighs from the people behind you in line. The $5 purchase on credit, once almost absurd, became routine. Why not? It was convenient. You'd pay it off later. Or would you? Here's where the story gets darker. Throughout the 1980s, average American credit card debt climbed steadily. Not because people were buying more houses or cars, because they were financing their daily lives. The minimum payment trap closed around millions of households. It worked like this. Your bill arrives. You owe $1,000. The minimum payment? Maybe $25. That seems manageable. You pay the minimum, feel responsible, move on. But at 18% interest, that $1,000 balance barely shrinks. Most of your $25 goes to interest. You're essentially renting your debt forever. Banks understood this perfectly. Minimum payments weren't designed to help you pay off debt. They were designed to maximize interest income while keeping you current enough to avoid default. And the marketing? The marketing reframed debt entirely. Debt wasn't irresponsibility, it was consumer choice. It was flexibility. It was living the life you deserve now. Why wait and save when you could have it today? Financial literacy education didn't keep pace. Schools didn't teach compound interest. Parents who'd grown up with cash didn't understand credit card math. Banks certainly weren't explaining it. A generation of Americans learned to carry balances as normal, not as a temporary bridge to next payday, but as a permanent condition, a baseline state. The bank's profits soared. Interest income became the primary revenue driver for card issuers. The more debt Americans carried, the more money banks made. It was a business model built on financial precarity. And it worked beautifully for the banks. As cards proliferated, so did fraud. The 1980s saw an escalating arms race between security measures and criminal innovation. Cards got holograms, those shimmery images that seemed impossible to counterfeit. Except criminals figured out how to counterfeit them. Signature panels were refined. Cashiers were supposed to compare your signature on the receipt to the signature on your card. Except cashiers were paid minimum wage and had lines to process. They rarely looked. Some cards added photos, more security in theory, but photo verification was inconsistent at best. Merchants remained liable for fraud in most cases. If they accepted a stolen card, they ate the loss. This created strange incentives, enough security to avoid obvious fraud, not so much that it slowed transactions. Meanwhile, criminals were innovating too. Skimming devices appeared, hidden attachments on legitimate card readers that captured your card data. Restaurant employees learned they could copy card numbers during the brief moment your card was out of sight. The magnetic stripe, revolutionary in the 1970s, was becoming a vulnerability. All your card information, unencrypted, readable by any device. The industry's response? Mostly hope. Hope that fraud losses stayed below the threshold where they exceeded profits. For now, they did. But the vulnerabilities were accumulating. By 1990, the transformation was complete. Credit cards had gone from suspicious novelty to essential accessory, from emergency backup to everyday tool, from financial instrument to lifestyle statement. The numbers told the story. Over 150 million Americans carried credit cards. Average household debt had tripled. The credit card industry generated billions in annual profits. A new cultural norm had emerged. Debt as normal. Debt as smart, even. Why use your own money when you could use the bank's? The 1980s had established credit cards as the dominant form of consumer payment. The gold card gleamed. The rewards points accumulated. The minimum payments kept rolling. But the real revolution was still coming. Because everything we've described, the swipe machines, the signature verification, the phone line authorizations, was about to be transformed by something none of these systems were designed for: the Internet. In our next segment, we'll watch the credit card industry collide with the digital age. We'll see how cards designed for physical presence adapted to online shopping. We'll witness the fraud explosion of the early web, and we'll meet the new technologies and new vulnerabilities that would reshape plastic money for the 21st century. The 1980s made credit cards normal. The 1990s would make them digital. The 1990s arrived with a promise. Technology would make life easier, faster, more convenient. And for credit cards, that promise was kept, perhaps too well. Every innovation of the decade made spending simpler, faster, more frictionless. The barriers between wanting something and buying something grew thinner and thinner until they nearly disappeared. Let's explore the decade that made spending effortless and debt almost invisible. Credit cards had always been for purchases. You bought things with them. If you needed actual cash, you used your bank account. But in the 1990s, those lines blurred. Credit cards gained the ability to withdraw cash from ATMs. Cash advances, they called it. Stick your credit card into the machine, punch in your PIN, and paper money comes out. It felt like magic. Your credit card could produce actual currency. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anywhere you found an ATM. What the machines didn't explain clearly was the cost. Cash advances came with fees. Typically 3 to 5% of the amount, right off the top. Withdraw $200, lose $10 immediately. And unlike regular purchases, there was no grace period. Interest started accruing the moment the cash hit your hand. High interest, often higher than your regular purchase rate. A $200 cash advance could easily cost $250 or $300 by the time you paid it off. More if you only made minimum payments. But at 2 in the morning, when you needed cash and the banks were closed, who was calculating interest rates? The money was there. The machine would give it to you. The consequences could be worried about later. People started treating credit cards like debit cards, like extensions of their bank accounts. The psychological distinction between spending money you had and spending money you were borrowing, it was eroding. Emergency cash, available anytime. That was the marketing pitch. The emergencies somehow became more and more frequent. Speaking of debit cards, the 1990s saw debit cards become widespread, and they created a confusion that persists to this day. Debit cards looked exactly like credit cards. Same size, same shape, same magnetic stripe on the back, often the same Visa or MasterCard logo on the front. But they worked completely differently. A credit card was a loan. You borrowed money from the bank and paid it back later. A debit card was direct access to your checking account. The money came out immediately. No borrowing, no interest. Just your own money, accessed through plastic. Many people didn't understand the difference. They looked the same. They swiped the same. The checkout experience was nearly identical. Credit or debit? The cashier would ask. This question baffled millions of Americans. What was the difference? Did it matter? Which button should they press? Running a debit card as credit meant signing instead of entering a PIN. It often provided slightly better fraud protection, but the money still came from your checking account either way. Running it as debit meant entering your PIN, faster usually, but felt more like using an ATM. The confusion was profitable for the card networks. Whether you ran debit as credit or debit, they collected fees. The more transactions, the more revenue. But for consumers, the blurred line between credit and debit meant a blurred line between borrowing and spending, between money you had and money you didn't. The wallet became a mystery. Which card was which? What happened when you swiped? Where did the money actually come from? For many people, it was easier not to think about it too carefully. And then came the internet. In the mid-1990s, a new way of shopping emerged. You could sit at your computer, browse pictures of products, and buy things without leaving your house. No driving to stores, no parking, no crowds. Just click, click, click. Purchase. But how would you pay? Credit cards. They were the only practical option. Amazon launched in 1995, selling books. eBay launched the same year, connecting buyers and sellers. Both required credit card payment. There was no other infrastructure for online transactions. Typing your credit card number into a website felt dangerous, and honestly, it was dangerous. Early internet security was primitive. Data traveled unencrypted. Hackers were discovering vulnerabilities faster than programmers could patch them. Stories of stolen credit card numbers made headlines. Identity theft entered the vocabulary. Parents warned children never to enter financial information online. And yet, people did it anyway. The convenience was too powerful. Books delivered to your door. Rare items found through search engines. Auctions where you could bid from your living room. Fear lost to convenience. It almost always does. The industry responded to security concerns with technology. Secure Socket Layer, SSL, encryption became standard. When you visited a secure website, your browser displayed a small padlock icon. The connection was encrypted. Your data was protected. This is a secure site. The message is promised. Your information is safe. People slowly began to trust online transactions. The padlock became a symbol of safety. If you saw it, you could proceed. If you didn't, you should be worried. The reality was more complicated than a simple icon could convey. Security was an arms race. Every improvement in protection inspired new methods of attack. But the perception of security was enough. People needed to believe their card numbers were safe, and the padlock gave them that belief. Online fraud did become a major problem. It remains one today. Card numbers stolen from databases, phishing emails tricking people into revealing information, sophisticated schemes that evolve as quickly as defenses against them. But e-commerce grew despite the risks. By the end of the 1990s, buying things online had gone from exotic to ordinary. Credit cards had found their perfect partner. The internet made shopping available 24 hours a day. Credit cards made payment instant. The combination was irresistible. Before the internet conquered commerce, there was the telephone. Operators are standing by. Infomercials ran at all hours, selling kitchen gadgets and exercise equipment and commemorative coins. Home shopping networks broadcast continuously, models displaying jewelry and clothing while prices flashed on screen. Call this number. Give your credit card. The product ships to your door. Reading your credit card number over the phone felt even more vulnerable than typing it online. You were speaking to a stranger. They were writing it down. What happened to that paper afterward? Who else might see it? The fear was not unreasonable. Employee theft of credit card numbers was a real problem. Unscrupulous operators did copy information and sell it. But again, convenience won. You wanted the product. The phone was right there. The operator was waiting. The impulse was now. By the time you thought through all the risks, you'd already given the number. Mail order catalogs, which had dominated home shopping for a century, began to decline. Why wait for the catalog to arrive, fill out an order form, write a check, and mail it back, when you could call or click and be done in minutes? Speed killed patience. Convenience killed caution. Gas stations discovered a simple truth. People hate going inside. They hate waiting in line. They hate the fluorescent lights and the stale coffee smell. They hate the extra 2 minutes it takes to walk in, pay, and walk back out. So gas stations put credit card readers directly on the pumps. Swipe your card. Select your grade. Pump your gas. Drive away. No human interaction required. No waiting. Just you and the machine. This was revolutionary convenience. Filling your tank became a 2-minute task instead of a 10-minute errand. Road trips got faster. Commutes got smoother. But there was a problem. Those card readers on the pumps were exposed, outside, unattended, relatively easy to tamper with. Criminals discovered they could attach skimmers, devices that captured card data when customers swiped. The skimmer looked like part of the pump. You'd never know it was there. Swipe your card, and the skimmer recorded your information. The criminal would return later, collect the data, and make counterfeit cards or fraudulent online purchases. Gas station fraud exploded. It remains a significant problem today. Those convenient pumps are also convenient for thieves. The lesson repeated itself. Every convenience creates a vulnerability. Every open door invites unwanted guests. The 1990s saw credit cards transform from payment tools into games. Every card now offered rewards, points for every purchase, miles for every dollar, cashback on everything you bought. Airline miles became a parallel currency. People accumulated hundreds of thousands of miles, dreaming of first-class flights to exotic destinations. Credit card companies partnered with airlines, hotels, retailers, spend here, earn there. The math could be genuinely favorable. If you paid your balance in full every month, you were essentially getting a 1 to 2% discount on everything you bought. But the rewards were designed to encourage spending. The more you spent, the more you earned. That new television might push you over the threshold for a free flight. Those shoes might complete a rewards tier. People started gaming the system, opening multiple cards for sign-up bonuses, churning, getting the bonus, closing the card, opening another, maximizing points per dollar with Byzantine strategies. Banks both encouraged and punished this behavior. They wanted you to spend. They didn't want you to beat them at their own game. Terms and conditions expanded to 50 pages. Rules changed without clear notice. Points expired. Redemption got complicated. For people who carried balances, the majority of cardholders, the rewards were an illusion. What good is 2% cashback when you're paying 20% interest? But the rewards felt good. They made spending feel productive, like you were earning something, not just consuming. That feeling was worth billions to the credit card industry. 0% APR for 12 months. The offers arrived constantly, bright envelopes promising escape from credit card debt. Transfer your balances to this new card and pay no interest for a year. It seemed like free money. If you owed $5,000 at 18% interest, you were paying $75 a month just in interest charges. Transfer that balance to a 0% card, and all your payments went to principal. People shuffled debt from card to card, the old balance disappearing here, reappearing there, the interest clock resetting with each transfer. There were catches, of course. Transfer fees, typically 3% of the balance. That $5,000 transfer cost you $150 up front, and the promotional period ended. 12 months seems long when you sign up. It feels very short when you've been making minimum payments and the deadline approaches. What happened when the promotion expired? The interest rate jumped, often to 20% or higher, sometimes retroactively applied to the remaining balance. People who had felt clever, gaming the system with 0% offers, suddenly found themselves paying more interest than ever. The trap had sprung. Banks made fortunes on this cycle. The balance transfer offers kept coming. People kept taking them. The debt kept growing. Throughout the 1990s, credit limits climbed steadily. A card that once maxed out at $2,000 now offered $5,000, then $10,000, then $25,000 or more. Banks competed for your debt. Higher limits meant more potential interest revenue. More spending capacity meant more transaction fees. Congratulations, your credit limit has been increased. These notices arrived unsolicited. You didn't ask for more credit. The bank just gave it to you. Generous? Perhaps, but also strategic. Higher limits meant higher potential balances. And people tend to spend up to their limits. Give someone a $10,000 limit and they'll carry more debt than if you'd given them $5,000. Pre-approved offers flooded mailboxes. You've been selected. You qualify. Exclusive invitation. The mail seemed to suggest that credit card companies desperately wanted you, specifically, as a customer, that you were special, chosen. In reality, the algorithms had simply identified you as profitable. Someone likely to carry a balance and pay interest. Someone worth pursuing. Debt levels rose accordingly. The average American's credit card debt climbed throughout the decade. More cards, higher limits, more spending, more interest. The infrastructure for a crisis was being built. Perhaps the most elegant trap of all was the minimum payment. Each month, your statement showed a balance and a minimum payment. As long as you paid that minimum, you were in good standing. No late fees, no penalty rates. Everything was fine. In the 1990s, minimum payments dropped. What had once been 5% of your balance became 3%, then 2%. Some cards went even lower. This seemed helpful. Lower minimums meant more affordable payments, easier to manage during tight months. But the math was devastating. If you owed $5,000 at 18% interest and you paid only the 2% minimum, how long would it take to pay off? 30 years or more, and you'd pay thousands of dollars in interest along the way, far more than the original purchase price of whatever you'd bought. Banks weren't required to show you this math. Not in the 1990s. The fine print disclosed interest rates, but not the true cost over time. People made their minimum payments faithfully. They felt responsible. They were keeping up with their obligations. They didn't realize they were on a treadmill designed to never end. That the minimum payment was calculated precisely to maximize interest while keeping them compliant. The 1990s made spending effortless. ATMs provided cash at midnight. Websites accepted orders at 3 in the morning. Gas pumps never closed. Rewards made spending feel productive. Balance transfers seemed like clever financial moves. Every innovation reduced friction. Every technology made the transactions smoother. And underneath it all, Debt accumulated, quietly, steadily, in millions of households across America. The 2000s would bring a reckoning. But that reckoning was still hidden in the future, behind the glow of computer screens and the swipe of magnetic stripes and the satisfying beep of approved transactions. For now, in the 1990s, spending had never been easier. And that was exactly the problem. The 1990s brought credit cards online. E-commerce exploded. Fraud exploded with it. But the industry adapted, innovated, survived. By 2000, credit cards seemed invincible. They'd weathered every challenge, conquered every market, become so embedded in American life that imagining commerce without them was nearly impossible. Then came the 2000s. This decade would bring credit cards their greatest crisis since the Chicago disasters of the 1960s. It would expose predatory practices that had flourished in the shadows. It would trigger government intervention that actually, remarkably, helped consumers. And it would begin the transformation from plastic cards to digital wallets, from magnetic stripes to microchips, from physical objects to invisible data. The 2000s didn't just test credit cards, they reinvented them. The early 2000s were a strange time in American finance. Money was cheap, interest rates were low, banks were hungry for growth, and they'd discovered a new market: people with terrible credit. If you'd been rejected for credit cards your entire life, suddenly your mailbox was full of offers. Pre-approved, low introductory rates, high credit limits. The catch? There was always a catch. Teaser rates promised 0% interest for 6 months. What the fine print revealed, if you could find it, if you could understand it, was that after those 6 months, rates exploded to 25%, 29%, sometimes higher. Then there was universal default. This little clause meant that if you were late on any payment, your car loan, your mortgage, a different credit card, all your credit cards could raise their rates. One mistake, and your entire credit life became more expensive. Banks charged fees for everything: late fees, over-limit fees, annual fees, fees for not using the card, fees for using it too much. Payment allocation was deliberately structured against consumers. If you had balances at different interest rates, say a low-rate balance transfer and high-rate purchases, your payments went to the low-rate balance first. The expensive debt just sat there, accruing interest. All of this was legal. All of this was standard practice. The industry had discovered that people with bad credit, desperate for access, would accept almost any terms, and those terms were often designed to keep them in debt forever. It was predatory lending, dressed up in glossy mailers and cheerful customer service. Credit card debt wasn't the cause of the 2008 financial crisis. That distinction belongs to subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, and a financial system built on fantasy. But credit cards were part of the bubble. And when the bubble burst, they burst with it. Throughout the 2000s, Americans had used credit cards to maintain lifestyles they couldn't afford. Home equity dried up, put it on the card. Income not keeping pace with expenses, put it on the card. Living paycheck to paycheck but still wanting nice things, card, card, card. By 2008, total U.S. credit card debt exceeded $1 trillion. Then the crash came. People lost jobs, lost homes, lost the ability to make even minimum payments. Default rates spiked to levels not seen in decades. Banks panicked, and in their panic, they made everything worse. Credit limits were slashed, sometimes overnight, sometimes without warning. You might wake up to discover your $10,000 limit was now $2,000. If you were carrying a $5,000 balance, you were suddenly over your limit. Fees piled on. Cards were cancelled entirely. Accounts that had been open for years, paid on time, closed without explanation. And each of these actions, the limit cuts, the cancellations, destroyed credit scores, which made getting new credit harder, which made recovery harder. The very tools people needed to survive the crisis were being ripped away by institutions that had spent years encouraging them to borrow. It was a cascade of financial destruction, and credit cards were caught in the middle. Congress, for once, actually did something. The Credit Card Accountability, Responsibility and Disclosure Act, mercifully abbreviated to the Card Act, passed in 2009 and took effect in 2010. For years, consumer advocates had been screaming about predatory practices. For years, the industry had lobbied successfully to prevent regulation. But the financial crisis created political will that hadn't existed before. The Card Act wasn't perfect, but it was genuinely helpful. New rules required 45 days' notice before interest rate increases. No more surprise rate hikes. Universal default was effectively banned. Your credit card company couldn't raise your rate because you were late on an unrelated bill. Payment allocation was reformed. Now, payments above the minimum went to the highest interest balance first. The expensive debt actually got paid down. Statements had to show how long it would take to pay off your balance, making only minimum payments. This was often a shocking number, decades in some cases. Financial reality printed in black and white, and perhaps most importantly, people under 21 now needed a co-signer or proof of income to get a card. The days of setting up tables on college campuses and handing cards to anyone with a pulse were effectively over. Did the industry find workarounds? Of course. New fees, different structures, creativity in the service of profit. But the Card Act represented a genuine shift. For the first time in decades, the rules tilted slightly toward consumers. Sometimes the system actually works. While regulation reshaped the industry's practices, rewards programs were reshaping consumer behavior. Cashback became more generous. Not just 1% on everything, but 2% on restaurants, 3% on groceries, 5% on rotating categories. Cards competed fiercely for spending. Travel rewards grew sophisticated, points that transferred to airline partners. Miles that could be redeemed for premium cabin flights, hotel status that came with card membership. Premium cards pushed annual fees higher and higher. The Chase Sapphire Reserve launched in 2016 with a $450 annual fee, and people lined up for it. The benefits, lounge access, travel credits, trip insurance, concierge services, justified the cost, at least for heavy travelers. Online communities emerged, dedicated to optimizing rewards. The points and miles crowd analyzed every card, every transfer partner, every redemption opportunity. People planned wallet strategies. Which card, for which category, which combinations maximized returns. It was a game, a complicated, time-consuming game. And the players who mastered it extracted genuine value. The rest of America? They collected their 1% cashback and paid their 20% interest. The rewards game was designed for people who didn't carry balances. For everyone else, it was just marketing. While rewards evolved, so did the physical card itself. Contactless payment, tap your card, complete your purchase, had existed for years overseas. The technology used RFID chips that communicated with payment terminals wirelessly. American adoption was slow. consumers worried about security. Could someone skim your card just by standing next to you? The fears were mostly overblown, but they were real. More significant was the EMV chip, that small, metallic square now embedded in every card. The rest of the world had used chip cards for years. The technology was dramatically more secure than magnetic stripes. Each transaction generated a unique code. Stolen card data couldn't be reused. America resisted. The infrastructure upgrade was expensive. Why fix what wasn't broken? Then fraud made it broken. By 2015, American card fraud had reached crisis levels. The US accounted for nearly half of global card fraud, despite representing only a quarter of card transactions. The industry finally moved. October 2015 brought a liability shift. Merchants without chip readers became responsible for fraud. Chip readers appeared everywhere, and Americans learned to hate the new process. Insert card. Wait. Wait more. Do not remove card. Wait. Beep. Remove card. It was slower than swiping. It felt clunky. People complained constantly. But fraud from counterfeit cards dropped dramatically. The annoyance was worth it. Apple Pay launched in 2014. Google Pay and Samsung Pay followed. The premise was simple: your phone becomes your wallet. No physical card needed. The technology, NFC, near-field communication, was similar to contactless cards, but mobile wallets added crucial security improvements. Tokenization meant your actual card number was never transmitted. Each transaction used a unique one-time code. Even if intercepted, the data was useless. Biometric authentication, fingerprint or face recognition added another layer. Someone who stole your phone couldn't use your Apple Pay without your face or finger. It was, objectively, more secure than physical cards. Adoption was slow. Older consumers didn't trust it. Putting payment information on your phone felt risky, even if it wasn't. The habit of reaching for a wallet was decades old. Younger consumers embraced it faster. For digital natives, phone as wallet made intuitive sense. Merchants were uneven. Some had NFC terminals. Many didn't. The familiar ritual of "Do you take Apple Pay?" followed by disappointment became common. But the trajectory was clear. Physical plastic was becoming optional. The card was becoming data. The digitization of payments brought a new problem into sharp relief: data breaches. December 2013. Target announces that hackers have stolen 40 million credit card numbers from their systems. 40 million. Customers panic. Banks scramble to reissue cards. The holiday shopping season is disrupted. It was just the beginning. Home Depot, 56 million cards. Equifax, 147 million people's personal information. Yahoo, Marriott, Capital One. The list grew longer every year. Americans got used to receiving letters. Your information may have been compromised. They got used to replacement cards arriving unexpectedly, got used to fraud alerts and account monitoring and the constant vigilance required to protect their financial identities. Banks improved fraud detection significantly. Algorithms analyzed spending patterns. Unusual activity triggered instant alerts. The days of discovering fraud, months later, were largely over. But the fundamental problem remained. Every transaction left a data trail. Every data trail was a potential target. Every target was eventually breached. The convenience of digital payment came with an inescapable vulnerability. Your financial information existed on servers you didn't control, protected by security measures you couldn't verify. This was the price of convenience. A partial solution emerged: virtual card numbers. Some issuers offered the ability to generate single-use or merchant-specific card numbers. Shop at a sketchy website? Use a virtual number that can't be reused. Services like privacy.com took this further, letting users create virtual cards for any purpose, with spending limits and merchant locks built in. If a virtual number was compromised, it didn't matter. It was already useless. The technology existed. Adoption remained limited. Most consumers didn't know virtual cards were available. Most who knew didn't bother. But for the security-conscious, virtual cards offered something valuable: control. In a world where breaches were inevitable, at least you could limit the damage. By the end of the 2000s and into the 2010s, credit cards had transformed almost beyond recognition. The physical object remained, that familiar plastic rectangle in your wallet. But what it represented had fundamentally changed. Cards were now just one interface to your account. You could pay with your phone, with your watch, with a virtual number that existed only as data. The predatory excesses of the early 2000s had been curbed, not eliminated but restrained. Consumers had more protection, more disclosure, more rights than ever before. But the vulnerabilities had multiplied too. Your card data lived on countless servers. Breaches were routine. Fraud was constant. Security was an endless arms race with no finish line. And yet, remarkably, the system held together. Transactions processed, purchases completed, commerce flowed. The credit card had survived its greatest crisis, had been reformed, digitized, transformed, had proven once again its remarkable adaptability. But the transformation wasn't over, because the 2020s would bring changes that even the previous decades couldn't have prepared us for. A pandemic that would accelerate digital payment by years in mere months. Cryptocurrency challenging the very concept of institutional money. Buy now, pay later, fragmenting the credit landscape. In our final segment, we'll bring this journey to the present and look toward the future. Where are credit cards going? Will they even exist in the form we know them? The plastic in your wallet has already outlived countless predictions of its demise. But the next transformation may be the most profound yet. We've traveled from the cash-only era through the chaotic birth of credit cards, watched the industry mature through decades of technology and regulation, and witnessed the debt crisis that nearly broke the system. Now we arrive at today and tomorrow. Credit cards have become so woven into modern life that they're nearly invisible. But beneath that familiarity, profound changes are underway. Some exciting, some troubling, all worth understanding. Let's explore where we are and where we might be going. The average American carries 3 to 4 credit cards. Not one, not two. A small collection, each serving different purposes or offering different rewards. American households carry over $6,000 in credit card debt on average. Collectively, U.S. credit card debt exceeds $1 trillion, a number so large it loses meaning. Credit cards have become essential infrastructure for modern life. Try renting a car without one. Try booking a hotel. Try establishing yourself as a trustworthy adult in the eyes of various institutions. The card is no longer optional. It's required. But this universality masks deep inequality. Many Americans live paycheck to paycheck. When the money runs out before the month does, credit cards bridge the gap. Not for luxury purchases, for groceries, for gas. for the prescription medication that can't wait. Meanwhile, those who can afford to pay their balance in full each month collect rewards, cash back, travel points, statement credits, free money essentially, for spending money they already had. Where do those rewards come from? Partly from merchant fees, but largely from the interest payments of those carrying balances. The person struggling to pay off last month's groceries is subsidizing the frequent flyer miles of someone who's never paid a cent in interest. The credit card system, like many financial systems, tends to reward those who already have resources and extract from those who don't. For some, credit card rewards have become a hobby, almost a sport. Online communities gather to discuss strategy, which cards to open, when to open them, how to maximize points per dollar, how to stack bonuses, and exploit promotional categories. Travel hacking promises free flights and hotel stays. Open this card, spend $3,000 in 3 months, collect 50,000 points. That's enough for a round-trip flight. Close the card before the annual fee hits. Open another. Some people fly first class around the world, paying almost nothing through careful manipulation of the rewards system. Then there's manufactured spending. Buying gift cards with credit cards to earn points, then using the gift cards for regular purchases. Cycling money through the system to generate rewards without actual spending. Banks try to stop these practices. Terms change, accounts get closed, rules tighten, but the hackers adapt. The game continues. Premium cards now charge $550 or more in annual fees. They justify this with benefits: airport lounge access, travel credits, elite status with hotels and airlines. For frequent travelers, these cards can provide genuine value. For everyone else, they're expensive status symbols. The rewards economy has created a strange world where the sophisticated extract maximum value while the uninformed pay for it. A new player has entered the payment space. Several players, actually. Affirm, Klarna, Afterpay, names you've seen at online checkouts, offering an alternative to credit cards. Pay in 4 easy installments. The pitch is simple. Split your purchase into 4 payments over 6 weeks. No interest if you pay on time. No credit check required. Just click and buy. Young consumers, especially those wary of traditional credit cards, have embraced these services. It feels different somehow. Less like debt, more like budgeting. But is it really different? You're still buying something you can't afford to pay for immediately. You're still committing future income to present purchases. You're still borrowing, even if the word credit never appears. The services market aggressively to young people, appearing at fashion retailers, promoting themselves on social media, making impulse purchases feel responsible because they're planned. Miss a payment, and fees appear. Use the service too often, and you're juggling multiple payment schedules across multiple platforms. The convenience that made it attractive becomes complexity that causes problems. Buy now, pay later may be credit cards reinvented for a generation that thought they were avoiding credit cards. The debt looks different. The math is the same. The pandemic changed everything about how we pay. Suddenly, touching cash felt dangerous. Handing bills to a cashier seemed risky. The invisible threat lurking on every surface made contactless payment not just convenient, but seemingly necessary. Many businesses shifted to card only. Some eliminated cash entirely. Tap your card. Wave your phone. No physical contact required. This trend hasn't reversed. Cash usage continues to decline. Businesses prefer the speed and record-keeping of digital payments. Consumers prefer not carrying physical money. In some countries, this transformation is nearly complete. Sweden, where paper money was first invented in Europe, now barely uses it. China has leapfrogged from cash to phone payments, skipping cards almost entirely. QR codes at every vendor, from restaurants to street performers. But digital payment dominance has a cost. What about people without bank accounts, without smartphones, without the documentation required to enter the financial system? The unbanked are excluded from an increasingly cashless economy. Their money, in physical form, becomes harder to spend. Their participation in commerce becomes more difficult. Efficiency for the majority creates barriers for the minority. Progress, as always, is uneven. Remember signing credit card receipts? That little squiggle on the slip that was supposed to verify your identity? It was always useless. Nobody compared signatures. The ritual persisted long after any security purpose had vanished. Now, signatures are disappearing, replaced by something that actually works. Biometrics. Your fingerprint, your face, physical characteristics unique to you. Apple Pay uses Face ID. Hold your phone near the terminal, glance at the screen, and you've authorized payment. Your face is your password. Some credit cards now include fingerprint sensors built directly into the plastic. Touch the card to verify it's really you. This seems futuristic, but it's becoming normal remarkably quickly. A generation is growing up, assuming that their body is their authentication. More secure than signatures or pins? Almost certainly. But also more intimate. Your biometric data, linked to your financial transactions, stored on servers you'll never see. The convenience is real. The questions about what we're trading for that convenience remain unanswered. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies arrived with revolutionary promises. Decentralized money, no banks, no credit cards, no intermediaries taking fees from every transaction. Some enthusiasts predicted crypto would replace traditional payments entirely. Why swipe a Visa card when you could send Bitcoin directly? The reality has been more complicated. Cryptocurrency is volatile. The price swings wildly from day to day. Merchants can't easily accept payment in something that might lose 10% of its value before they can convert it. Transactions can be slow and expensive. The energy consumption is enormous. The complexity intimidates ordinary users. Crypto credit cards exist now. You spend, you earn Bitcoin or Ethereum as rewards. But look closely. The transaction still settles in dollars on the back end. Visa or MasterCard still processes the payment. Crypto is a layer on top, not a replacement. Perhaps cryptocurrency will eventually transform payments. Perhaps the technical problems will be solved, the volatility will stabilize, the user experience will simplify, or perhaps crypto will remain what it largely is today, a speculative investment rather than a practical currency. The revolution, if it comes, hasn't arrived yet. While crypto enthusiasts dream of decentralization, governments are exploring the opposite direction. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, digital money issued directly by governments. China is already testing its digital yuan. Millions of people have used it. The technology works. The infrastructure is being built. Other countries are watching, studying, planning their own versions. If governments issue digital currency directly to citizens, what happens to Visa and MasterCard? What happens to the entire credit card infrastructure built over 70 years? CBDCs could bypass card networks entirely. Payment could flow directly from your digital wallet to the merchants, with the government's central bank processing everything. The credit card duopoly faces a genuine threat, not from scrappy startups, from the most powerful institutions of all, national governments, but CBDCs raise their own concerns. If the government issues your money and processes your transactions, the government sees everything you buy, every purchase tracked, every transaction recorded. No anonymity, no privacy. Cash offered privacy that we took for granted. The digital future offers convenience that may cost us that privacy forever. Credit cards enabled something that now pervades modern life. Subscriptions, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon Prime, news sites, fitness apps, cloud storage, meal kits, razor blades, dog toys. The credit card on file renews automatically. No decision required. The service continues. The charges appear. This is wonderful for companies. Predictable revenue, low churn. Customers who forget they're even subscribed. It's less wonderful for consumers drowning in subscription creep. $10 a month here, $15 there, another $8, another $12. Each seems trivial. Together, they consume hundreds of dollars monthly. Studies find people consistently underestimate their subscription spending. The charges are small enough to ignore individually, large enough to matter collectively. Canceling is intentionally difficult. The button is hidden. The process requires phone calls. The "Are you sure?" screens multiply. Credit cards made subscriptions possible. Whether they made our lives better is less clear. Every credit card transaction creates a record. Where you were, what you bought, when you bought it, how much you spent. This data is valuable. Banks sell purchase data, anonymized, they claim, to marketers and researchers. Patterns emerge, predictions become possible, targeted advertisements follow. You search for running shoes once, and shoe ads follow you across the internet for weeks. The connection between your credit card and your browser feels invisible, but it exists. Divorce lawyers subpoena credit card statements. Employers investigate suspicious expenses. Insurance companies look for evidence of risky behavior. Every transaction is recorded. Every purchase persists. The financial diary you never meant to write is permanent and accessible to those with authority or resources to demand it. Cash was anonymous. A $20 bill carries no history, leaves no trail. That anonymity is disappearing as cash disappears. We're trading privacy for convenience. Most of us make that trade without thinking, perhaps without fully understanding what we're giving up. Where does all this lead? Some predictions seem likely. Biometric payment will become normal. The card itself may disappear, replaced by your face or fingerprint or the chip already embedded in your phone. In Sweden, thousands of people have already implanted payment chips in their hands. Wave your hand at the terminal. Payment complete. It sounds like science fiction. It's already happening. Artificial intelligence will play a larger role. Spending assistants that warn you when you're about to exceed your budget. Credit decisions made in real time by algorithms analyzing thousands of data points. Blockchain technology may enable new forms of identity and payment we haven't imagined yet. Or perhaps society will push back. Perhaps privacy concerns will limit surveillance. Perhaps regulations will rein in the most extractive practices. Perhaps alternative systems will emerge that balance convenience with other values. The history of credit cards is a history of technology solving problems and creating new ones. Of convenience seducing us away from caution. Of systems that benefit some at the expense of others. There's no reason to think the future will be different. The plastic rectangles in your wallet are the latest chapter in a very old story. Money has always been evolving. Credit has always been a double-edged tool. Technology has always promised liberation and delivered complexity. What comes next depends on choices we make collectively, what values we prioritize, what trade-offs we accept, what future we build. The credit card, for all its familiarity, is still a work in progress. The story isn't over. It's just entering its next chapter. We've spent this journey talking about credit cards as financial instruments, the history, the technology, the networks and regulations and innovations. But there's another story running underneath all of that. A story about your brain. Because credit cards don't just facilitate spending. They're designed to encourage it. Every feature, every interface, every statement layout has been refined through decades of behavioral research to make you spend more than you otherwise would. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's business strategy, and it works. So let's pull back the curtain. Let's understand why credit cards are so effective at separating you from your money, and why that doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you human. Start with the most fundamental trick. Credit cards make money feel less real. When you hand over cash, physical bills, tangible currency, something happens in your brain. Neuroimaging studies show that parting with cash activates the same regions associated with physical pain. The insula lights up. You literally feel the loss. This is called the pain of paying. It's evolution's way of making you careful with resources. Now swipe a card. Tap your phone. Click Buy Now. The pain response? Dramatically reduced, sometimes nearly absent. The money leaves your account just the same. The debt is just as real. But your brain doesn't register it the same way. The transaction feels abstract, theoretical, not quite real. Studies consistently show that people spend 12 to 18% more when using credit cards compared to cash. Some research suggests even higher, up to 100% more for certain purchase types. Think about what that means. The same person buying the same things will spend significantly more simply because of the payment method. This isn't willpower failure. This is neuroscience. Your brain evolved to track physical resources. It didn't evolve to track invisible debits from magnetic stripes and radio waves. Credit card companies understand this perfectly. Every innovation that makes payment more seamless, contactless, one-click, auto-pay, further abstracts money from the physical, further reduces the pain of paying. They're not making things convenient for you. They're anesthetizing your brain's natural spending resistance. Here's where it gets even more insidious. Making a purchase triggers a dopamine response. That's the pleasure neurotransmitter. The anticipation of acquiring something, the moment of acquisition, these are genuinely pleasurable experiences. Credit cards enhance this. You get the item without the immediate financial pain. Pure pleasure, no cost. At least, no cost you feel right now. But modern credit cards add something else. Rewards. Buy something, earn points, earn miles, earn cash back. Watch your rewards balance grow. That's a second dopamine hit. Not just the pleasure of buying, but the pleasure of earning. And there's a third. The feeling of beating the system. I'm smart. I'm getting free money. The bank is paying me to shop. 3 dopamine responses from a single transaction. Pleasure layered on pleasure. The banks aren't worried about paying you rewards. They've done the math. Every dollar they give you in points generates multiple dollars in additional spending. The dopamine hits keep you swiping. You're not outsmarting them. You're responding exactly as their behavioral economists predicted. Look at your credit card statement. What number catches your eye first? For most people, it's the minimum payment. This is not an accident. Behavioral economists call this anchoring. The first number you see becomes your reference point. Everything else gets evaluated relative to it. Your balance is $3,000. The minimum payment is $60. That $60 looks small, manageable. You can handle $60, so you pay $60, or maybe $100, feeling virtuous. At 20% interest, paying the minimum on that $3,000 balance means you'll pay it off in about 15 years. You'll pay over $4,000 in interest. The $3,000 purchase actually costs $7,000. But the statement doesn't anchor you to that number. It anchors you to 60. The Card Act now requires statements to show how long payoff takes at minimum payments. It's there in print. But it's not the anchor. The minimum payment is still displayed prominently, still shapes your perception. Banks designed these statements. They know exactly what they're doing. The minimum payment isn't there to help you. It's there to keep you in debt longer. Credit cards exploit a deep quirk in human psychology. We discount the future. Buy now, pay later. The purchase is immediate, tangible, real. The payment is somewhere out there. Next month. Future you's problem. And here's the thing about future you. You don't really identify with that person. Psychologically, your future self feels almost like a stranger. Brain scans show that thinking about yourself in 10 years activates similar regions to thinking about other people. So when you put something on credit, you're essentially making a stranger pay for it. Future you will deal with the bill. Future you will have more money. Future you will be more responsible. Except future you is still you, with the same income, the same expenses, and now additional debt. This is called temporal discounting or present bias. We overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future consequences. It's universal. It's human. Credit cards are the perfect tool for exploiting this bias. They divorce the pleasure of buying from the pain of paying, sometimes by weeks, sometimes by years. The debt accumulates, and when future you finally arrives, they're stuck with bills present you ran up. What's in your wallet? That question isn't just about payment methods, it's about identity. The card you carry signals who you are, or who you want others to think you are. The heavy metal Chase Sapphire Reserve, the Platinum Amex with its decades of prestige, the sleek Apple Card with its minimalist design. These aren't just payment tools, they're status markers. When you pull out a premium card, you're making a statement. I have arrived. I am successful. I am the kind of person who carries this card. Marketing reinforces this constantly. People like you use this card. Exclusive benefits. By invitation only. Member since. The cards become tied to identity. And once something is tied to identity, it's much harder to question rationally. That $550 annual fee isn't just buying benefits. It's buying membership in a club. It's buying a self-image. And spending on the card? That's just what members do. Speaking of annual fees, have you ever felt compelled to use a card just to get your money's worth? You paid $450 for that premium card. Now you have to earn that back in benefits. You have to use the travel credit, have to visit the airport lounge. This is the sunk cost fallacy. The $450 is gone regardless of what you do. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're losing money if you don't maximize the benefits. So you spend. You book travel you might not otherwise take. You use the dining credit at restaurants you didn't really need to visit. You accumulate points that you must redeem before they expire. The pursuit of getting your money's worth often costs more than the fee itself. Loss aversion amplifies this. Humans feel losses about twice as intensely as equivalent gains. The fear of losing your rewards, points expiring, credits unused, is psychologically powerful. If I don't use this card, I'm leaving money on the table. It feels like logic. It's actually manipulation. Modern credit cards remove friction from spending. Tap to pay, one-click checkout, saved cards on every website, auto-pay subscriptions. Each reduction in friction makes spending easier. You don't have to think, don't have to decide, don't have to actively choose to part with money. But notice what has high friction. Stopping. Want to cancel a subscription? Navigate a phone tree. Wait on hold. Speak to a retention specialist. Fill out forms. The process is deliberately difficult. Want to cancel a credit card? Similar hoops, plus warnings about credit score damage, plus transfer of your rewards balance. Barriers everywhere. The asymmetry is intentional. Spending is frictionless. Stopping is work. Companies rely on your inertia. That gym membership you haven't used in months. That streaming service you forgot about. That subscription box that keeps arriving. You meant to cancel, but it was easier not to. And another month charged. Inertia is profit. Have you ever actually read your credit card agreement? The average agreement is over 20,000 words, written in dense legal language, full of cross-references and exceptions and conditionals. This is not an accident. If you understood exactly how credit cards worked, how interest compounds, how payments are allocated, how penalty rates trigger, you might use them differently. Confusion benefits the banks. Interest calculations are opaque. Average daily balance sounds simple. It isn't. Grace periods have exceptions. Minimum payments are calculated by formulas you've never seen. Financial literacy is not taught in most schools. Banks lobby against requirements for clearer disclosure. The complexity persists, and people who don't understand the terms make more profitable customers. You're not supposed to understand. You're supposed to use the product without thinking too hard about it. The fine print exists to protect the bank legally. It's not designed for you to actually read. One final psychological trap: shame. Credit card debt carries stigma. It feels like failure, like you did something wrong, like you're bad with money. So people don't talk about it. They don't tell friends what they really owe. Don't ask for help. Don't compare interest rates or strategies. The shame keeps them isolated, and isolation keeps them in debt longer. Banks benefit from your silence. If everyone talked openly about credit card terms, about rates, about the real cost of carrying balances, the pressure for change would be enormous. But shame keeps the system opaque, keeps you alone with your statements, keeps you making minimum payments in private. Breaking that silence is powerful. Talking about debt normalizes the struggle, opens doors to strategies, reduces shame. The first step out of debt is often the hardest. Admitting it exists. Here's what I want you to take away from this. If you've ever overspent on credit cards, you're not weak. You're not stupid. You're not uniquely bad with money. You're a human brain going up against decades of sophisticated psychological research, against systems deliberately designed to exploit your cognitive biases, against corporations that employ behavioral economists specifically to make you spend more. The pain of paying is numbed. Rewards trigger dopamine. Anchoring shapes your perception. Present bias discounts consequences. Status hooks your identity. Sunk costs drive irrational behavior. Friction is asymmetric. Terms are opaque. Shame keeps you silent. You are never fighting fair. Understanding these tricks doesn't make you immune, but it helps. Knowing that the minimum payment is an anchor lets you look past it. Knowing that future you is real lets you protect them. Knowing that rewards are designed to increase spending lets you evaluate them honestly. Credit cards are tools, powerful tools. Like all powerful tools, they can build or destroy. The question isn't whether credit cards are good or bad. The question is whether you understand them well enough to use them deliberately, rather than being used by them. Because the house always has an edge. The only defense is knowing what that edge is. In our final segment, we'll step back and reflect on everything we've learned. What have credit cards given us? What have they taken? And as we move into an increasingly digital future, what's the real relationship between convenience and control? We've traveled 70 years through the history of credit cards, from Frank McNamara's forgotten wallet to tap to pay with your face. From 14 restaurants in Manhattan to global networks processing trillions of dollars. Now let's pause. Let's think about what this transformation has meant, what we've gained, what we've lost, and what we might do with that understanding. The benefits of credit cards are real, undeniable, substantial. Convenience, first and foremost. The ability to walk through the world with a thin piece of plastic instead of bundles of cash, to buy something now and pay later, to never worry about having exact change. Safety. Cash can be stolen, lost, destroyed. A credit card can be cancelled, replaced, the fraudulent charges reversed. Someone pickpockets your wallet. Inconvenient, but not catastrophic. Fraud protection that previous generations couldn't imagine. Banks absorb most losses from stolen cards. Purchase protection covers damaged goods. Extended warranties stretch beyond manufacturer limits. Travel benefits. Insurance you didn't know you had. Rental car coverage, trip cancellation protection. Airport lounges where you can escape the chaos. Rewards, if you can pay your balance in full. Cash back, travel points, statement credits, real value, returned to you for spending money you were going to spend anyway. Credit history, a track record that opens doors. Mortgages, car loans, apartment rentals, all easier with established credit. Emergency access to funds when life goes sideways. The car breaks down, the roof leaks, the medical bill arrives. Credit cards provide a buffer against disaster. And online shopping. The entirety of e-commerce. Billions of transactions that wouldn't exist without cards. The ability to buy anything from anywhere at any hour. These gains are genuine. They've improved lives, made things possible that were impossible before. We should acknowledge that before we talk about what came with it. Something changed when we stopped handling physical money. There's research on this. People spend more with cards than with cash. Not a little more, significantly more. The pain of payment is dulled when you don't actually hand anything over. Cash was tangible. You earned it, held it, spent it, watched it disappear from your wallet, felt your resources diminishing as you made choices. Cards abstract that away. Numbers on a screen. A balance you'll deal with later. The money doesn't feel quite real until the bill arrives. Privacy disappeared so gradually we barely noticed. Every purchase tracked, every transaction recorded. Databases know more about your spending habits than you do. Cash was anonymous. A $20 bill told no stories about where it came from or who spent it before. That anonymity is gone. We used to balance checkbooks, remember each purchase, maintain awareness of our financial state. Now, apps do that if we bother to check them. The simple relationship between earning and spending has grown complicated. Credit means spending money you haven't earned yet. That temporal shift changes how we think about work, about value, about what we can afford. We gained convenience. We lost connection. Whether that trade was worth it, perhaps each person must decide for themselves. Credit cards don't treat everyone equally. The rewards programs that benefit frequent travelers and big spenders, they're funded partly by interest payments from people carrying balances. The person struggling to pay off medical debt is subsidizing someone else's first-class upgrade. Predatory lending targets vulnerable populations. Higher rates for those with lower scores. Fees that accumulate fastest for those least able to pay them. The debt trap is real. Once you're behind, the interest charges make catching up nearly impossible. Minimum payments calculated to maximize interest while providing the illusion of progress. Credit scores create a two-tier system. Good credit opens doors. Better rates, more options. Landlords who return your calls. Bad credit closes them. And the unbanked, people without access to traditional financial services, are increasingly excluded from an economy that assumes everyone has a card. Credit cards benefit the wealthy most. They cost the struggling most. The system, as designed, transfers wealth upward. This isn't conspiracy. It's just how the incentives align. But understanding it matters. Visa and MasterCard are among the most profitable companies on earth. They don't lend money, they just process transactions. And they collect fees on every single one. Banks make billions from interest charges, from late fees, from over-limit fees, from balance transfer fees, from cash advance fees. Those merchant fees, 2 to 3% on every transaction, they're built into prices. The store pays them, but they pass the cost to customers, which means everyone pays more. Even people using cash, even people without credit cards at all. The fees are invisible, embedded in the price of everything. The system is designed to benefit financial institutions. They built it, they profit from it, they lobby to protect it. Consumers carry the risk. Consumers pay the costs. Consumers navigate the complexity. This is just reality. Not good or bad, necessarily, but worth understanding when you reach for that card. Other countries have made different choices. Interest rate caps that prevent the most extreme charges. Restrictions on fees. Stronger consumer protections. Regulations that prioritize borrowers over lenders. The United States chose a market-friendly approach. Let companies compete. Let innovation flourish. Let consumers choose among options. The result? More innovation than most countries. Credit cards that do more, offer more, provide more features. Also, more predation, more debt. More people trapped by terms they didn't understand. Both things are true. Innovation and exploitation grew together. It could be different. It has been different. In other places and times. The system we have is a choice, not an inevitability. Just be responsible. It's advice often given to those struggling with credit card debt. And it's not wrong, exactly. Individual choices matter. Paying your balance in full avoids interest. Reading terms and conditions prevents surprises. Self-control with spending keeps debt manageable. But this advice ignores something important. The system is designed to encourage debt. Teams of psychologists and data scientists work to make spending easier, to make minimum payments seem reasonable, to make credit feel like free money, blaming individuals for falling into traps that were engineered to catch them. It's incomplete at best. Both things are true simultaneously. You should be responsible, and the system could be designed better. Understanding this helps. It's not about excusing poor choices. It's about recognizing that you're not playing on a level field. The game is tilted. Knowing that changes how you play. Here's the thing. You can't really opt out. Try renting a car without a credit card. Try booking a hotel room. Try establishing credit for a mortgage someday. Try functioning in an economy that assumes plastic. Credit cards aren't optional anymore. They're infrastructure, required equipment for participating in modern economic life. So we navigate an imperfect system. Use the tools while understanding their dangers. Extract the benefits while avoiding the traps. It requires vigilance, attention, effort. That's exhausting. It shouldn't be necessary, but it is. Credit cards are tools that changed the world. From a chaotic experiment in 1950s Fresno to a trillion-dollar global industry, from carbon copy imprinters to invisible waves of data, from 14 restaurants to every merchant on Earth. They transformed how humans relate to money, made spending effortless, made debt invisible, created convenience and crisis in equal measure. The plastic in your wallet or the digital version on your phone carries more power than you probably think. More danger, too. Understanding the history helps, not because it changes the system, but because it helps you see clearly what you're dealing with. 70 years of evolution, fraud and regulation, technology and marketing, convenience and consequence, all compressed into that thin rectangle that's probably within arm's reach right now. So that's the story. How we went from cash to plastic, from charge plates to tap to pay, from simple transactions to complex financial instruments. The credit card, 70 years old, not going anywhere. Use them wisely if you use them at all. Pay the balance when you can. Read the terms even when they're boring. Remember that the rewards exist because someone else is paying interest. And maybe, occasionally, pay with cash, just to remember what money feels like. The weight of it, the tangibility, the direct connection between what you have and what you can spend. There's something grounding about physical currency, something real in an increasingly abstract world. The credit card changed everything about how we spend, but it couldn't change what money fundamentally is. Trust made tangible, value made portable, human cooperation encoded in paper, metal, plastic, or data. That story is much older than credit cards, and it will continue long after whatever comes next. So that's the surprisingly chaotic history of the credit card. But let's shift to another story of transformation and power. We've traced the arc of credit, from chaotic mailbox drops in Fresno to invisible transactions flowing through smartphones. A system built on psychology, technology, and the endless human dance of spending and debt. But here's a thought to carry with you. Long before banks learned to take their percentage of every transaction, someone else had already perfected that art. Governments. Let's journey back, thousands of years now, to ancient empires and mud-brick palaces, to discover where tax systems began, and why their shadow stretches all the way to today.